Among the strange and mysterious beings of the past, no one has earned more universal comment and attention than the unidentified mystic who suddenly appeared out of the unknown at the beginning of the 18th century using the alias of the Comte de Saint Germain. His alchemical feats, extremely old age, and unsolved ciphers are prominent topics of debate, but there's a bigger story here that nobody's talking about. Now, before we get started, if you're a fan of the esoteric and historical mysteries, then you've come to the right place. So if that's of interest to you, please click on the subscribe button, calculate the word's English ordinal value of 98, reduce to 17, and reduce once more to get 8. Do you see it yet? The final reduction is 33. All right, let's get into today's video. Boris Karloff's 1963 Tales of Mystery, we have The Man Who Lived Forever, a true tale of mystery. A master in the secret arts apparently could turn lead into gold, and supposedly died in the 1780s, but who knows, the Count may be walking among us today.
Saint Germain, Your Majesty, occultist, scribe, and counsel to the great courts of Europe.
Now, the study of Saint Germain's life is a topic that seems somewhat dull when you first approach it, but the more you dig in, study, and read, the more a mystery starts to form that I think most historians have overlooked. I've read over 20 books on the topic, and one of the most hard to obtain books is the Comte de Saint Germain by Jean Overton Fowler. Now, I was lucky enough to get this book for $50, so check your local bookstore. You might be able to make some money on that one. But the last chapter of that book, in combination with some other research, is extremely interesting. But before we can get into that, let's fill in the gaps. I've broken up the video into the following sections. First, we'll look at his character. What kind of a guy was he? And then we'll get into his plethora of talents. And how did it seem that he was more talented than any single person could ever become in one lifetime? Next, we'll look at his age and the different accounts of how old he was. Some say hundreds of years old. Some say thousands of years old. Then we'll look at his connections to yoga, which, depending on the context, can be one and the same as alchemy. And Saint Germain was definitely an alchemist. Did he possess a philosopher's stone? This may be connected to his ridiculous and enormous wealth, which surpassed not only that of entire monarchies, but at one point he had better credit than the entire country of France put together. Then we'll look at his connections to Freemasonry, Knights Templar, Rosicrucianism, and was he the founder of any of these orders? Next, we'll see how he was strategically removed from history, not only by kings and queens, but by Freemasons themselves. Then we'll look into his physical disappearances, where there's accounts of him essentially disappearing into thin air. Hebrews says to remember to be hospitable to strangers because you never know when you're going to entertain an angel. In chapter 10, we're going to look at the 2 books which remain that he wrote, which are the Trinosophia and the Triangular Book of Saint Germain. Both of these have ciphers that have never been solved. In chapter 11, we'll look at his alternate identities and all the aliases he used throughout the years and in different countries, of which he admits himself to using. And finally, at the end of the video, I'll put together something that historians have failed to do up until this point, and that is to present a valid theory for how Saint Germain may have actually lived for hundreds of years. Chapter 1, Character. So to get started, I'm going to turn to Encyclopedia Britannica from 1911. In the modern version, they've taken out quite a bit of information. So going back to the older version, Saint Germain, called the Wonder Man, a celebrated adventurer who, by the assertion of his discovery of some extraordinary secrets of nature, exercised considerable influence at several European courts. Of his parentage and place of birth, nothing is definitely known. The common version is that he was a Portuguese Jew, but various surmises have been made of his being of royal birth. In addition to being called a perhaps Portuguese Jew, Saint Germain is referred to sometimes as the Wandering Jew, which is really interesting because the Wandering Jew is a character who was supposedly at the crucifixion of Christ, a Christian legend character doomed to live until the end of the world because he taunted Jesus on the way to the crucifixion. So he doesn't get to die. He's living forever and is hundreds and thousands of years old. Saint Germain's situation is really similar. He traveled all around the world. There's rumor that he was even in Mexico. And with speculation of him being a Jew, he's a wandering Jew who is potentially hundreds of years old. Turning to the Rosicrucians, their rites and mysteries, there's a whole chapter on the wandering Jew, and they speak about it as if it's more of a status that they can achieve rather than a historical figure. To return for a moment to the idea of the wandering Jew, which some have supposed to be derived from the claim that the Rosicrucians have in their possession a secret means of renewing youth, and they have some notion of it in their writings. So in addition to being called a Portuguese Jew, he was often referred to as a wandering Jew, and he fit the description quite perfectly. He knew nearly all European languages and spoke German, English, Italian, French with a Piedmontese accent, Portuguese, and Spanish. Grimm affirms him to have been the man of the best parts he had ever known. He was a musical composer and a capable violinist. His knowledge of history was comprehensive, and his accomplishments as a chemist, on which he based his reputation, were in many ways real and considerable. After spending some time in Persia, Saint Germain is mentioned in a letter from Horace Walpole as being in London about 1743 and as being arrested as a Jacobite spy and released. This is the actual letter written by Horace Walpole, and it mentions Saint Germain right here. The other day they seized an odd man who goes by the name of the Count of Saint Germain. He has been here these 2 years, will not tell who he is or where he came from, but professes two very wonderful things. The first is that he does not go by his right name. And the second is he never had any dealings or desire to have any dealings with any woman nor with any succedaneum. He sings, plays on the violin wonderfully, composes, is mad, and not very sensible. He is called an Italian, a Spaniard, a Pole, a somebody that married a great fortune in Mexico and ran away with her jewels to Constantinople, a priest, a fiddler, a vast nobleman. The Prince of Wales has an unsatisfied curiosity about him, but in vain. However, nothing has been made out against him. He is released, and what convinces me that he is not a gentleman, he stays here, talks of his being taken up for a spy. So that letter is the first piece of historical correspondence that we have about Saint Germain, and we get an insight into his character. Walpole writes more about Saint Germain here. In the year 1743 or thereabouts, there came into England a person who called himself the Count of Saint Germain, which he owned was not his name, but he never would own what was his name, nor give any account of himself, nor could it be discovered who he was. He had little or no color, his hair and beard were extremely black, he dressed magnificently, had several jewels, large remittances, but made no other figure. He had parts, was said to understand the mathematics, had apparently much scholastic knowledge, and was a vehement disputant. In other words, a strong, passionate debater. But his chief talent was music. He sung in a most agreeable taste, but with little or no voice, composed genteelly, particularly several songs for the opera here, and played exquisitely on the violin. He was too great of a musician not to have been famous if he had not been a gentleman. What makes it more probable that he was a priest was his professing immaculate chastity and affirming that he had never felt any sensation of lust. Manly P. Hall has a description in his book, The Most Holy Trinosophia. Part 1, The Man Who Does Not Die. In personal appearance, the Comte de Saint Germain has been described as medium height, well proportioned in body, and of regular and pleasing features. His complexion was somewhat swarthy, and his hair dark, though often powdered. He dressed simply, usually in black, but his clothes were well-fitting and of the best quality. His eyes possessed a great fascination, and those who looked into them were profoundly influenced. According to the Madame de Pompadour, he claimed to possess the secret of eternal youth, and upon certain occasions claimed to have been personally acquainted with Cleopatra, and at another time chatted familiarly with the Queen of Sheba. Had it not been for his striking personality and apparently supernatural powers, the Comte would have undoubtedly been considered insane, but his transcending genius was so evident that he was merely termed eccentric. It was 1743, the rumor spread that a foreigner enormously rich, judging by the magnificence of his jewelry, had just arrived at Versailles. Where he came from, no one has ever been able to find out. His figure was well knit and graceful, his hands delicate, his feet small, and the shapely legs enhanced by well-fitting silk stockings. His nether garments, which fitted closely, suggested a rare perfection of form. He wore skinny jeans. His smile showed magnificent teeth, a pretty dimple marked his chin, his hair was black, and his glance soft and penetrating. Oh, what eyes! Never have I seen their like. He looked about 40 or 45 years old. He was often to be met within the royal private apartments, where he had an unrestricted admission at the beginning of 1768. History of the 7-Year War by Frederic the Great. Just on his arrival, there appeared at the court another political phenomenon that never could be deciphered, just like his books, who called himself the Count of Saint Germain. He had been in the service of France and so highly in the favor of Louis XV that the monarch wished to give him the palace of Chambord. This person enacted the part of an ambassador, began to negotiate without credentials, and spoke injuriously of the Madame de Pompadour and the Duke of Choiseul. The English dismissed him and treated him as an adventurer. Frederic the Great continues in his posthumous works, I enjoy the favor which the King of France has granted to Saint Germain. I have long been acquainted with this brave officer, nor will he render himself unworthy of the place he has obtained. He possesses a merit which is necessary to act with propriety in it, as well as a laudable zeal for public good, which cannot be but a recommendation to him with all worthy people. He was, perhaps, one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, the friend of humanity, wishing for money only that he might be able to give to the poor, a friend to animals. His heart was concerned only with the happiness of others. A hero of romance, a charlatan, a swindler, and an adventurer, rich and varied were the names that showered freely upon him, hated by the many, loved and reverenced by the few. Time has not yet lifted the veil which screened his true mission from the vulgar speculators of the period. The Count is not known to be an importunate sycophant. He is a man of good society to whom all are pleased to attach themselves. He at all events stands in close relation with many men of considerable importance and exercises an incomprehensible influence on others. My cousin, the Landgraf Karl von Hessen, is much attached to him. They are eager Freemasons and work together at all sorts of hidden arts. He is supposed to have conversations with ghosts and supernatural beings who appear at his call. Saint Germain was spoken of as a man of learning, a lover of truth and devoted to good, and a hater of baseness and deception. The same writer testifies to the fact that Saint Germain ate no meat, drank no wine, and lived according to a strict regime. Louis XV gave him a suite of rooms in the royal Chateau de Chambord, and he constantly spent whole evenings at Versailles with the king and the royal family. According to the testimony of all who knew Saint Germain intimately, he has left the reputation of being a marvelous person. In the ordinary man, he awakened distrust. A curious detail in his life is that he never ate in the presence of others. He is generally regarded as being a strict vegetarian who ate no meat and drank no wine. and by the brilliant conversation and fascinating anecdotes, he was able to divert the mind of his royal host from the fact that he ate and drank nothing of the lavish spread placed before him. He would emerge in the evening to converse enchantingly and sometimes mysteriously, but would never consent to be present at the table of his host, for the diet to which he seemed to have adhered to so religiously throughout his life did not include meals in public. His needs were the simplest and his circumstances greatly reduced. He always dined alone and very simply. His wants were very few. It was impossible while at Anspach to persuade him to dine at the prince's table. However, since nobody ever saw him dine, there is no proof that he ate at all. Was he one of those long-lived adepts who lived without eating, a state achieved by some long-lived yogis in the Himalayas? All of Saint Germain's biographers are agreed on the point that he was never seen to eat. When invited to the most sumptuous repasts at the tables of kings, Saint Germain resolutely refused to eat any food. Saint Germain was described as looking like a man of middle age, or at least seeming so, even if much older, due to his possessing the secret of eternal youth, the goal of the alchemical philosophers, of whom he was supposed to have been an outstanding adept. His face was devoid of wrinkles, and he was free from any physical infirmity, enjoying at all times perfect and undeviating health. Frederic the Great, Voltaire, Madame de Pompadour, Rousseau, Chatham, and Walpole, who all knew him personally, rivaled each other in curiosity as to his origin. No one, during the many decades in which he was before the world, succeeded, however, in discovering why he appeared as a Jacobite agent in London, as a conspirator in Petersburg, as an alchemist and connoisseur of pictures in Paris, or as a Russian general at Naples. People agreed, and in his day when a high value was set upon manners and evidence of breeding, that Saint Germain was well born. His grace and bearing with ease in all society were charming. In appearance, Saint Germain was refined and intellectual. He was clearly of gentle birth and had moved in good society. He was a wise and prudent man who never willfully offended against the code of honor or did anything that might offend our sense of probity. All who came in contact with Saint Germain noticed that he possessed this vigor and alertness of body and soul to a remarkable extent. People thought he lived by virtue of some charm, for he was never known to eat in public, to confess to illness or fatigue, or to grow perceptibly older in looks. Cobenzel found him to be the most singular man he had ever known, and announced that he believed him to be the son of a clandestine union in a powerful and illustrious family. Possessed of great wealth, he lives in the greatest simplicity. He knows everything and shows an uprightness and goodness of soul worthy of admiration. Saint Germain is of medium height and elegant manners. His features are regular, his complexion brown, his hair black, his face mobile and full of genius. His carriage bears the impress and the nobility common only to the great. The Count dresses simply, but with taste. His only luxury consists of a large number of diamonds, with which he is fairly covered. He wears them on every finger, and they are set in the snuff boxes and his watches. Though he is not especially tall, he has the exquisite courtesy and dignity of a grand seigneur of the 18th century. We feel at once that he belongs to a very old and noble family. His eyes are large and brown and are filled with tenderness and humor, though there is in them a glint of power, and the splendor of his presence impels men to make obeisance. His face is olive-tanned, and his close-cut brown hair is parted in the center and brushed back from his forehead, and he has a short and pointed beard. He was also such a brilliant conversationalist raconteur, so widely traveled, so deeply read, so learned, so light-hearted, so urbane, and withal such lavish and so splendid, that he outshone even his own diamonds and sparkling precious stones. He showed forth the best principles, fulfilled all external religious duties with exactitude, was very charitable, and everyone agreed he was of the purest morals, of noble and serious manners, exemplary conduct. Saint Germain was in many respects a remarkable man, and whenever he was personally known, he left a favorable impression behind, and the remembrance of many good and sometimes noble deeds. Many a poor father of a family, many a charitable institution, was helped by him in secret. Not one bad nor dishonest action was ever known of him, and so he inspired sympathy everywhere.
Saint Germain, your Imperial Majesty, astrologist, intelligencer, and scholar.